Hey, everybody. Welcome to Sports Talk with Dredd. So, I got some stuff going on here. We know that just very recently, the NHL has discussed that they are not going to allow, for the time being, anyways, teams to cross the border. Um, and I'm guessing this is all coming from the spread of the Omicron variant of COVID-19. So, I'm going to touch on two articles here that were written the last couple of days, and we're going to go over them. And I'm not going to show them on the screen or whatever, but I am going to. I'll link them in the description down below so you could read them yourself. These are both from the Edmonton Journal, and both by the same gentleman, David Staples. So the first one is December 18th, 2021. It's called Lockdown Pain. Edmonton Oilers have now lost Puljujarvi, the Bison King, to COVID. And I'm not going to read the whole article, but I am going to read one of my takes at the end of it. So Mr. Staples says, in the headline, I call this lockdown pain as opposed to COVID pain. Why? The NHL has about 90 players now on COVID protocol. They're all out for a substantial length of time, which has caused the cancellation of games and a watering down of existing games. The issue now isn't the health impacts of COVID itself. Almost all of these players, are either asymptomatic or are experiencing mild symptoms. In other words, their youth, their excellent fitness, and their fully vaccinated status are doing what we'd hope they would do, protecting them from any kind of serious outcome of COVID. In other years, if these players were this healthy, they'd almost certainly be suiting up for games, and no one would think anything of it. But because the fear of COVID is so strong in a large group of people, we're still taking extremely restrictive and punitive action when young and healthy people get the disease. Is it not time for that to end, for the NHL to stop all testing of non-symptomatic players? I would suggest it is. And he lists a tweet here from Adrian Dater, which says, many I've talked to in NHL, players, management, etc., are fed up with the COVID protocol. One called it a charade. The overly frustrated feeling can be summed up as, these are some of the fittest people on the planet, they're vaccinated, and nobody ever gets really sick. Enough. Mr. Staples goes on to say, you could argue that if they get sick, the players will threaten spread to others. That's a fair point. It's not unreasonable. But I will offer a counter argument to my own take that at this point, anyone in North America who wants to be fully vaccinated is fully vaccinated. They're also able to get booster shots. In other words, they're highly protected from COVID, perhaps as protected as they will ever be. And after almost 2 years of this mess, folks are also versed in how to protect themselves from COVID through physical distancing and isolation if they're highly vulnerable or around someone who is, and through changes to diet and fitness regimes that can greatly lessen obesity, which also offers solid protection from the worst outcomes. The argument that it's time to get on with our regular lives, save for some hideous and healthcare system threatening impact from the Omicron variant, has never been stronger. My own take is that outside of an Omicron meltdown, it's now time to do what Sweden did from the start and learn to live with a virus with minimal lockdown measures and a reliance on the vaccines, common sense, and personal responsibility to get us through. How did this work out for Sweden? Poorly at first, as they had a high death rate, but since early June, their death rate has been flat. As other jurisdictions have had third, fourth, and fifth waves, Sweden so far has not. Mr. Staples goes on to say it's too early to tell which direction the Omicron variant will take us. Some say it's going to be the worst wave yet and crash our healthcare systems like never before, as this highly contagious variant both hammers the unvaccinated and also breaks through into the vaccinated population and produces enough outcomes to make a difference. Excuse me. But the early news out of South Africa, where the variant first took hold, is more hopeful than that, with leading physicians saying almost all cases have been asymptomatic or mild, with their healthcare system still on its feet, and with some even hoping that this variant will act as a form of inoculation. That if most of us get it, we won't get that sick, but will be protected from future, more virulent variants of COVID. Of course, South Africa has a much younger and less obese population than Western nations. It also had an exceedingly high level of previous COVID spread, which bolsters immunity greatly. We still don't know how Omicron will impact our own society, one that is uniquely vulnerable to COVID because we're older and less physically fit on average than other nations, and also because our highly complex healthcare system, with its high levels of care and many rules of care, is vulnerable to being overwhelmed, with just 150 to 300 COVID patients in ICU able to overwhelm our system in Alberta, a province of 4.4 million. Uh, a side note from Dredd, that's ridiculous. That's a that's a shitty system, is what that is. Our healthcare workers are outstanding, but they're getting burnt out by a system that hasn't been able to adapt rapidly to the threat of COVID. And anyone opposing all forms of lockdown can't get around that fact. He's got a tweet from Fraser Nelson that says South African authorities have released data showing that so far, Omicron is so far proving significantly less deadly than earlier waves. Significantly less deadly. Yet people are freaking out more. All right. So then we go to the next article by Mr. Staples from December 19th. Fear of COVID knocks out Edmonton Oilers and entire National Hockey League until after Christmas. This in for the NHL. NHL and NHLPA have agreed to continue the regular season, with details of that agreement outlined in the link below and in this thread. Following Oiler games have been postponed. December 20th versus Anaheim, December 22nd at LA Kings, December 23rd at San Jose. It's a tweet from Clay Travis. Red Wings GM Steve Yzerman says COVID testing healthy athletes for COVID doesn't make sense in his opinion, given they have no health threat. We need more coaches, GMs, and players saying the same. And here's what Mr. Staples has to say about this at the bottom. I wrote about the COVID issue at length yesterday, so I'll refer back to what I said. Essentially, that it's a time of fear and confusion right now due to the Omicron virus. But if we find this virus is mild and does not threaten our healthcare system, it's time to lift all of our lockdown restrictions. We are all double or triple vaccinated. We can still practice social distancing if we feel vulnerable. If Omicron has no more impact than the common cold, it's time to start acting like a brave and healthy society, not a fearful and dysfunctional one. The mental, physical, and economic hardship is utterly crippling. It's been utterly overlooked and downplayed by the hardcore of the pro-lockdown crowd from day one, even sneered at by a short-sighted and all too comfortable few. Strikes me that the unrelenting fear, isolation, and stagnation are now far more dangerous than the ever-dwindling risk of the virus. Let me read that again. But it strikes me that the unrelenting fear, isolation, and stagnation are now far more dangerous than the ever-dwindling risk of the virus. Mr. Staples goes on to say, again, it could be that Omicron changes that calculation, but if it does not, I can no longer in good conscience support the locking down and masking of my children, my family, my city, and my province. How about you? How do you see it? NHL has about 90 players now on COVID protocol. They're all out for a substantial length of time, which has caused the cancellation of games and a watering down of existing games. It's now brought on this pause in the schedule until after Christmas or longer. When has any kind of lockdown measure been as short as it's first promised to be? Issue now isn't the health impacts of COVID itself. Almost all of these players, or all of these players, are either asymptomatic or experiencing mild symptoms. In other words, youth, excellent fitness, fully vaccinated status, doing what we'd hope they would do, protect them from any kind of serious outcome of COVID. So that's what he all wrote before. As he says at the bottom, it's not time. If it's not time for that to end, for the NHL to stop testing of non-symptomatic players, I would suggest it is. So that's what Mr. Staples has to say about what's going on with the NHL and COVID-19 protocols and the Omicron variant. And I could not agree more with him. Um, this doesn't have to be a political issue, but this should be a social issue and an issue where people use their brains. Um, Omicron is happening. Sure, it is. It is a variant, and it is a fast spreading variant. but look at the numbers of people being hospitalized. Don't worry about the numbers of how many people have it, because if people are having it and they're either asymptomatic with no symptoms or have very light symptoms and they're not being hospitalized, they're not at risk, then it doesn't actually really matter, does it? It just means the vaccinations did their job and this thing is slowly dying out. And with more people being vaccinated around the world, because we know some areas of the world still don't have good vaccination records, that'll help things. Pretty soon we won't even get any more variants. It'll just die out because it won't have anywhere to go. But if you give in to the fear, oh my God, we're all going to die. I better triple, quadruple mask and never leave my house again. I mean, that's not even supported by the facts. So look at the facts of what's going on. Look at the number of people being hospitalized and dying. And when you look at those numbers, also take into account that some of those people are from before Omicron came around. They've been in the hospital maybe for a while, or are now passing away from their struggle with COVID. And those are usually going to be people who have some kind of predisposition medically, that they're for the most part fully healthy people. Who's really fully healthy, but you know what I mean. The healthier large segment of society is able to deal with COVID for the most part. So let's take off the fear and and start demanding our health leaders and our government leaders look at the facts instead of just looking at the fear. Um, I think we'd all be better off for it. And I know, as Mr. Staples says, our NHL players, our athletes, those in the top shape of their life, certainly would be. And yeah, so a little bit of sporting news from a writer for the Edmonton Oilers, where he takes on some social issues, some medical social issues, and talks about society being too scared to be reasonable at this point, not even understanding what the facts are showing, just being led around by fear. So, people, that's all I've got to say about this. Catch y'all next time. Sports Talk with Dredd, Miss Valley Gaming. My name is Dredd.